All right, what's going on, everybody? It's the Arty 84 show here live, episode 143, week 20-something of quarantine. And we are all in our regular locations as usual. Oh, there you go. No one's in studio because we can't be because we have to stay 6 feet apart from each other. As always, to the left of me, Adam DeMallet. No Mr. Glover tonight, but we have a couple guests tonight, don't we, Adam?
Yes, we do. Running for election this November to the Washington House of Representatives and representing District 45 position 2. Our guest this evening is Republican Amber Krabach.
Hey, everybody.
How you doing? All the way out on the left coast.
Thank you very much.
And for the third time during quarantine, good friend of ours, good friend of the show, Mr. Kacy Granitsas. Did I pronounce your last name right? I always butcher it.
It's always butchered. That's fine.
Also known as Arminius Ir Finelli. Correct?
Arminius R. Feniel is
okay.
the pronunciation of the pen name.
Published author, and going to be here talking about just stuff in general in his newest book that's available on Amazon right now, The Desecration of the World, The Fallen Book 3. Mr. Kacy, always a pleasure to have you on board here on the show. You are full of fun information, I have to tell you that much.
I'll try to keep my sarcasm down to a minimum.
Listen, if anyone is, could give a nice perspective on everything, it's you, my friend. So there you go. We are in the middle of the summer here. It is the 5th of August. Shout out to my dad. It is his birthday today. And it's very hot, very humid. And we're going to start off with Amber out in the left coast of Washington. Adam, I know you have a few questions lined up for her.
Always. No, but Amber, thank you for joining us and taking time out of your busy schedule to participate here today. I appreciate it. I'm sure you're extremely busy, so it means a lot to us. It's nice to have you here. It's nice to have a perspective. We mix it up around here. We have people from all professions on the show constantly, and it's nice to have a politician here for once. So it's really great to have you.
Well, wait a minute. I was a former politician.
I'm sorry. You're right, Arty. You were. Arty ran for. You did run for.
I did, and it didn't work out very well, but it is what it is.
It's true. It is.
Sorry, I didn't vote for you. You weren't in my ward.
I know. Next time around, I'll make sure I could redraw those lines so you can get in there.
So, Amber, you seem to be big on trying to fight corruption here. Your state seem to be very adamant and vocal about the corruption going on in Washington State. I mean, what would you say is the number one out of all the problems? Would you say is the biggest corrupt issue in your state?
Well, that's a big question.
I'm sure it is. I know it's not easy to answer, and that's fine. It gives you time to talk. Okay. So there you go.
It does. I appreciate it, Adam. This is wonderful to be on this show and to meet all of you. It's a great opportunity, and it's nice to kind of bridge the gap between the East Coast and the West Coast a little bit, especially since we kind of share. I think you guys understand personally a lot of what we're going through out here in Washington State.
Absolutely.
And when it comes to the corruption, it's becoming quite obvious that really is the core of what we're dealing with. Like we can complain about taxes and transportation budgets and things like that. And those are legitimate complaints that we have as well. But really it boils down to the cronyism that has become kind of the practice of government out here in Washington State, and particularly in the Seattle, King County area where we are. It's you end up realizing that your government isn't based on the priorities of the people of Washington State anymore, that it really and truly is based on those relationships, those crony relationships where the decisions about education are made based on what the unions want, because that's who's donating to the campaigns for the governor or for the office of superintendent of public instruction, which is up for election this year as well. So as far as the core area, it's pervasive. It really and truly, our government is saturated. And like I said, it's no longer It no longer appears to be a representation of what the people of Washington state need or want from their government. But I would say when you get down to the basics of where we really need to start making changes, where that, because you can change the corruption at the education level, but if you don't address the underlying issues of corruption in the budget and auditing, you'll just end up right back in that swamp where you were before. And so I'd say priority wise, if you really want to get down to making sure that the changes that you make are changes that can't be just quickly undone, and that stay and make sure that you're actually making progress toward a government that serves the people like it's supposed to, I'd say we really need to address and probably budgeting, because you just really need to make sure that your money is spent where the people want it to be spent, that there's oversight, that there's not money laundering or racketeering going on, that you're not dealing with industrial complexes that are being formed, particularly in areas of social reform like homelessness, or along the lines of LGBTQ activism and their rights and their protections as well. A lot of that is being exploited, and the people are being manipulated, particularly under states of emergency where you just don't have the oversight of the budget because the rules are different. There's a lot of money being moved around that just appears to be kind of intentionally from even the Black Lives Matter protests or the riots that have been happening. It appears that they're protecting the ability to riot and damage buildings in order to move money and say, hey, this is for building restoration, and there isn't a lot of oversight where that money goes. So I'd say that's an area where I'm honestly looking at the next legislative session and saying, I have no idea how we crawl out of this pit. How do we get out of this? We have no one working. We have no revenue coming in. Yep. And if we don't have revenue, we can't pay our budget for the government. And they're still spending tons of money on the budget for the government. Like the government writes checks. Nobody's being furloughed. So
they write checks for for accounts that they don't have the money for. And it's they print paper, as you say, and they've done it for years. And that's how we get into a recession and deficit of the economy. And obviously, you in Washington State, a very blue, very Democratic state historically over the years, and you a Republican in a district that is very, very blue, going against the incumbent who was a former mayor of a town, or city, I should say, in that district. Now, I noticed you ran against him 4 years ago in 2012. Was that your first time trying for this position?
Actually, I ran against him 2 years ago in 2018, and it was my first position or first time that I ran against him. In fact, his wife is currently the mayor of Kirkland, which is one of the cities that is partially in my district. And there's, he's been in office since my husband and my oldest son and I moved out here in 2004. He was elected that year, probably 6 months after he moved out here. So he's been in office for 16 years, a long time. And anytime you have that length and that seniority, even though seniority can be a really good thing, even in politics, it can be a good thing. There's a lot of experience that's valuable in that. But, anytime you have time in politics and government like that, you end up with a higher risk of corrupt relationships being formed, and kind of this blockade or checks and balances being removed, so that more cronyism can happen, and so that the people the people have no recourse to address it. And that's frustrating and concerning, of course, with it. And my opponent is very kind. He's always very gracious, and I appreciate that about him. But I certainly am concerned about his campaign donations and the unions that are getting money from him.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Or I'm sorry, the other way around, that he's getting money from, and then he's passing legislation to benefit them and things like that. That's stuff I'd like to see. That actually may be the core issue that we need to address is, look, the antitrust laws that we would apply to corporations, really need to apply to our government officials as well. If you're working on, if you take donations from, corporate entity or from a union entity or something like that, you really need to recuse yourself from legislation, either, proposing it or sponsoring it, or voting on it, so that there is no conflict of interest there, so that you can't end up with these kind of relationships, these crony relationships that usurp that position of priority that the people really should have.
Yeah, I do think a lot of times, like some of these problems, it's like, we got to fix this, but it's the how do we fix this? Yeah, it's nice to say we should do all this, but it's like, how? And I do believe a lot of politicians get into business in thinking, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And then they get into office and they realize their hands are tied and like, oh shit, I can't, and they don't know what to do. So they end up falling into what they didn't want to do because they have no choice. I think that's what happens sometimes.
Yeah, I think that happens a lot, especially in situations where the legislation is so tangled and complex. I mean, it builds on itself. But it can end up kind of thwarting your efforts to really clean house. And so sometimes you have to undo sections of legislation before you can implement what you actually want to do. And there's a place for saying, look, we should have term limits that really can help cut down on corruption and things like that. But that also, cuts down on the progress that needs to be made. If it takes, 6 years in order to change the legislation that you want to change, you really want those people that are dedicated to doing that in that office, if possible, or someone like them. But, term limits can have a kind of a downside as well. That's pretty significant. If there's, whereas if you pass legislation that kind of just very simply requires you to recuse yourself from any legislation that would directly benefit somebody that gave you money, or that you have a beneficial relationship with, then you don't have to, that may take care of the issue, the underlying issue that we're really having, rather than having to say, okay, well, you just can't have as much time to work on things, when that's not necessarily the real issue. It's an idea that needs to be explored more, and I'm not sure how complex the legislation would have to be for that, but I think it's a better way to tackle that issue, kind of at the core level, or the foundational level.
I'm a big fan of term limits, and like you said, it does make a good point, because if you want to have someone who's working on a project or working on a task, it may require more than a couple of years in which they have in office. But then you see the opposite, especially here in Massachusetts, where you had Senator Kennedy here in power for 40 years, and what was the progress? Some would argue there was a lot, some would argue there wasn't. And the problem with that is you have the same person in there, and like you said, you have these connections, you make these relationships with people who are funding you, so they keep you in power. And you, at the end of the day, are only helping a small percentage of the people who are in your state or your district, your city, your town, or your ward, or any of that nature. Instead of doing what you're supposed to be doing, is serving the general public and doing the best for what is for your state, district, whatever.
Exactly right. Yep.
And,
exactly right. I think. Oh, go ahead.
No, and the fact that the representative position is only 2 years, I think that's kind of an insult to that position. For the matter that most towns and cities, their mayors are 4 years, and in my eyes, you're above the mayor. You are managing sometimes multiple cities and multiple districts in the city, so you have a little bit more power. And I don't understand why a senator would have 6 years in term. But just a representative only has 2. I feel like you can't get done because you're campaigning for 6 months, and then you're debating for another. It's you never ever have the time to actually focus on to the task in hand, and instead you are just you're pretty much just your wheels are spinning at the same time, and you're making these connections of certain groups of people who are very generous and donating and whatnot, and at the same time they're the ones you're helping, and you're not helping Joe Schmo down the street who owns a small business who may need a little help or legislation to help him basically do something he wants to do for the better of the people. And how would you feel?
Exactly.
How do you feel the same? It's why is it only 2 years for a representative? Is there ever been established the reason why that is the case? But
I couldn't tell you for sure. I can make a guess. I believe that's constitutional for the state of Washington. Our senators are actually 4 years,
okay.
like our governor is, I believe, not 6. Although I might actually
the state senators.
that.
Okay, I'm thinking of the federal, two
Of
Senate
federal, yeah. So
that's
I think our Senate elections are every 4 years.
okay.
And so, but you're absolutely right. You know, you're spending a significant amount of time, your second term or your second year, campaigning. And really and truly, you know, that may not have been an issue when the government was formed and established. It may have been that 2 years really meant and kind of guarded over the purest representation that they could have, where even if the demographics of the 45th district changed, and maybe they changed fairly rapidly when the government was first set up, and it's really important to make sure that the person in place is genuinely and accurately representing the people that they are elected to represent. And maybe it, you know, when that was decided, that was sufficient, and it really did make sure that the representation was accurate and was really close to what it needed to be as much as possible. I would say that as government grows, one of my biggest concerns, and the reason that I think we have this significant schism in our country, or all of this division in our country right now, is because our government is massive. The power that our government has right now is, you know, essentially they control our lives. I mean, we're watching these governors and mayors completely shut down whole states. And if it's, you know, if that's pervasive enough in other states, then all of a sudden our entire country is shut down, and we really suffer for it, even if it's not something that we are supportive of. You know, we suffer the consequences, and obviously they're not shutting down the Washington state government.
Yeah. And
so they're not really suffering those consequences. So I would say that when we started, Washington state's constitution is very, very conservative. Mm-hmm. Our equivalent to the Second Amendment actually uses the term impaired instead of infringed on for your right to keep and bear arms. Like, it really is even stronger than the U.S. Constitution. So I think, you know, the intention was for government to be very small in Washington state. Yeah. And when government is really small, you know, making changes isn't that big of a deal. And legislators are in there, and they don't actually have a whole lot of work to do, because they technically shouldn't be, you know, passing laws to give orcas $1 billion and things like that. Like, it's the scope of your responsibility and your prerogative and your reach of authority is so much smaller that your requirement in your job isn't as burdensome. And so we're not looking at, maybe at the time when it was established, we're not looking at 1,000 pieces of legislation that you have to try to get through in each house, which is pretty much what we had the last 2 or 3 legislative sessions, if I remember correctly. You're looking at, you know, small changes that just need to make sure that the constitutional rights or the constitutionally protected rights of the people are truly protected, and that, you know, that you don't have cronyism in your government, and you don't have trust being formed in your corporations or in the businesses that are coming in, and you know, guarding over things like that to make sure that the people really are advocated for. At this point now, in the U.S. government and the federal government, and in many states, I think most states, the government or the government officials hold so much power at this point that any change in a government official and who runs that is significant, because it may mean that one group or another is really disenfranchised. And so then not only do you have the issue of corruption and kind of the issue of, you know, campaigning is suddenly this massive undertaking that requires a lot of time and energy, but you also have this significant division, because the people that are disenfranchised are rightfully going to be very, very concerned about it, and very angry that people are supporting, you know, a candidate or a party that would disenfranchise them. And so you end up then with not class warfare, but just political, ideological warfare, which is really tough. It's really tough. And I think the key to getting us back to a place where we don't have that division is really deregulating government. I'm glad to see our president doing that as much as he has been. It feels like a drop in the bucket, And I'm sure at the state level here, it would feel the same way. But it is what needs to be done. There are times I wish I could just scrap the whole thing and start from scratch. Just start fresh. Just the Constitution, just the basics. And unfortunately, I don't know that there's a way to do that. And so
I would even go further back than that. I say we go back to hitting each other with clubs. I say we scrap everything, Amber. Let's just go way back. Let's just start with that. Cave drawings and drafting out things to keep it simple.
I did want to bring up.
There are days I think we've earned that.
Yeah.
I think that would be probably well deserved and might teach us a lesson and help us make sure we're grateful for not having to be there in the future.
You touched on how states were shutting down and a little bit about deregulating government. But how did you feel? Do you feel there should have been, since we have a pandemic going on, a nationwide list of things each state should do rather than allowing each governor of each state to pretty much make the rules? And it seems, for me personally, having each governor in charge of the regulations during COVID-19 seems to be kind of a clusterfuck right now, because no one can get on the same page. Instead of, some states are overprotective like Massachusetts and New York, and some states are very lenient and underprotected like Mississippi, Georgia, Tennessee. And we're seeing this in Florida for that matter.
And non-existent.
Yeah. I feel, as many people know, I am I support Trump and I'm a Republican, but I do think that he did drop the ball on the fact that he should have put his foot down and used, his power to say, hey, listen, we're under this is something the country has never seen. Even in 100 years when we had the Spanish flu, I don't think it was this significant because of the technology and the population, how many more people are here and how many more things are involved with being shut down, that he should have stepped in and said, hey, listen, this is what we got to do. You got to do this, you got to do that, and not let the governors take control, because obviously conservative states are going to go more conservative way. More liberal states are going to go another way, and at the end of the day, you're going to have this hodgepodge, in which we're staring at now, where if everyone just got on the same page in March, we would have been, somewhat in the clear here going into August, and we wouldn't have these problems. I don't know. How do you feel about this?
Right.
Well put.
So I totally understand the frustration that you have. I am a staunch federalist. So in general, my view is, unless it's protecting constitutional rights, or constitutionally protected rights, the federal government should be involved as little as possible.
Okay.
That said, I think there is a place in this issue that we're dealing with, in this season that we are in, for the federal government to step in and say, okay, you can go this far and no further.
Yep.
So, you are more than welcome to recommend that people wear masks and to present the data that supports that, and to encourage that and to incentivize it however you feel is appropriate. But you may not mandate it, because that's a violation of the Constitution. That's a constitutional violation, a violation of people's freedom and bodily autonomy, or, along those lines. I think there's a place for that. And I do appreciate that, very close to the beginning of everything, maybe it was in April, I think it was BAR, the Department of Justice, said, look, if you feel like your governor is infringing on your basic rights, on your liberties, this is he gave us a hotline, I think, even a phone number. Okay. This is where you need to go, so you can report that, so the Department of Justice can respond if it's appropriate. And I appreciate that. I think there's a possibility that the governors are really hoping that the president will step in and kind of overstep his authority, so that they can hammer him for it as a dictator. And so,
yeah, that makes sense.
I think there's a balance there. I do really wish that there would be more action on the federal government's part, in general, whether it's from President Trump or from the Department of Justice, or from the Department of Homeland Security, as far as the riots are going and things like that, to step in and say, look, you have gone too far. These are constitutionally protected rights. You may not overstep that line. However, I do think that the governors and the mayors that are being really naughty know all of this already. And so the way that they are running the system right now, it avoids those issues. So maybe they'll like the whole idea with defunding the police or telling the police they can't engage unless there's a threat to life.
Yeah.
You know, what that does is if the mayor sets a curfew and all the law-abiding citizens go home because of the curfew, we've seen this in Seattle, Mayor Durkan then extended the curfew and extended the curfew and extended it to the point where it was only the protesters and then the rioters that were kind of infiltrating those groups that were left. And that's, you know, that's then their opportunity, because they can riot and loot and damage all they want. And there aren't law-abiding citizens there to confront them or to oppose them. And so there isn't a threat to life. And then the police cannot intervene because they are not allowed to intervene unless there's a threat to life. And so all of that can happen. And so long as they aren't damaging a federal building, the federal government can't come in, or you can't have Department of I guess it would be the FBI come in and arrest people, or U.S. Marshals or something along those lines. Now, if you cross state lines to go and riot, that's a federal offense. And then Department of Homeland Security can come in and say, look, this is, you know, this interrupts state commerce. It has to do with the fact that your home state could be sued by the state that you go and damage property in. And so it becomes a commerce issue, and then it's a federal crime. So that's why I think we saw Department of Homeland Security, I guess, agents down there arresting people. They actually had grounds to make a federal arrest,
illegally, and
at that point they avoided.
Yeah, committing a crime in a state that's not theirs. I mean, you know,
exactly.
I understand the government, you know, these very liberal cities not wanting the federal government involved, and they want to defund the police department. And I think it's a terrible idea, to be honest with you. But, you know, as the president of the United States, I could see him saying, okay, listen, you want to do so, we will pull back, but we will protect federal buildings, because that is federal money. That is the entire United States who pay taxes. We fund these buildings, and he has the entire right to defend them. So, you know, and they did that. I think they did that in Portland a couple weeks ago. He pulled back and said, we're only going to defend these courthouses because this is federal property. And it's a federal offense to do anything illegal to this building. And, you know, if you want to let your cities burn and fall apart and, you know, take drastic steps backwards to what was established, that took so many years, especially like a city like New York City, that took so many years to get to the point where they are. It's a safe city to go to, a great tourist spot, and now it's starting to resemble the New York City of the 70s and 80s, which no one in their right mind wanted to go to. We look at New York City in the 70s as we do sometimes Detroit and cities of that nature nowadays.
Exactly.
It's just a crazy.
And then you end up seeing also that the mayors, and hopefully the people of Boston or New York or Seattle or Chicago or Portland in particular, you know, hopefully the people that are there realize that their vote, their decision and who they elect has a consequence.
Yeah.
And I think that hadn't been communicated very well before. It was sort of like the federal government in past administrations had come in and, you know, kind of swoop in to save the day. And it made me concerned that it was actually a kind of an industrial complex where it's like, well, yeah, we have a homelessness problem, and so we need federal money for that. And the federal government would say, oh yeah, of course you do. Yep. But then, you know, it ended up being $2 billion later that Washington or that Seattle is not actually addressing their homelessness problem. They're funneling money into places because it's another state of emergency that, you know, we don't have a whole lot of oversight, and the tiny homes communities they're building aren't actually rehabilitating people.
Money's going elsewhere.
Staying there, and
you have Microsoft and Amazon, two of the world's country's biggest companies based in the state of Washington, and they're begging for federal money. Adam, you look like you've been gnawing on the bit there to say something. You have a question?
No, it's like Amber, like I'm sure like throwing yourself into the political arena, I'm just sure is exhausting. Like you have to always be on top of everything that's going on and who said what and everything. And even just listening to you talk, I'm like, my jaw is like, because it's just so much information being thrown at me. And it's like, I gotta ask, like, what do you do for fun? All right, let's say you have 2 weeks, right? You can't do anything politically related. What does Amber do? Like, hypothetically, what would you do? 2 weeks, no politics.
2 weeks.
Yes.
Okay, well, so it is honestly like drinking from the fire hose. And when in 2018, when I first jumped in, it was because nobody was running against the incumbent in my district, and I was appalled. Our taxes are through the roof. I'm like, how can nobody be running? And I joked around about it. I don't know if you heard Marshawn Lynch, one of our favorite Seahawks
I know you're a Seahawks
running backs.
Yes.
He had a line that he used because he was shy. He was great at football, and if you asked him about his football game and stuff, he was fine. But they always wanted to ask him a whole bunch of questions, and he never wanted to answer. Mm-hmm. And they finally started fining him for not answering.
It's unbelievable.
One year he basically just responded to them, "I'm just here so I won't get fined." And every time they asked him a question, that was what he said. And so I joked in May of 2018 when no one was running, I said, "Look, I'm going to run, and my slogan is going to be, I'm just here so we don't get taxed." And everybody laughed about it. And I had 2 friends that came back, very close friends of mine that I really revere, in politics in particular, specifically. And both of them asked me personally if I would actually run. And I thought it over, and I actually filed, knowing that I filed on the last day on Friday, knowing that I could take it back up until Monday. Yeah. And my husband and I talked about it over the weekend. And so that's how I got involved. And I'm telling you, I got 4 hours of sleep a night that whole campaign season. It was like 6 months of literal, like virtually drink from the fire hose coming at you. And it's the politics right now is a really good fit for me. I have a passion for justice. I have a hard, maybe it's a compulsion. When there's an injustice, I have a really hard time.
No, it's true.
Just letting it go. So.
You're giving me the politician answer, though, Amber. You're dancing around the
know.
question.
I know.
It's not going to work. If you had 2 weeks to yourself, though, like, what would you do? Like, what are your
vacation?
hobbies?
Would you go?
Like, politicians are always, to me, it's like
it's nonstop.
They have
it never
to devote
ends.
their lives.
Yeah.
So much to it. I'm always curious to know, like you do live outside of that. Like, what do you do? Like,
Yeah. And it really, especially in times like this, it's like the news cycle is constant, and it is constant research. And I honestly, I love the research part, so it keeps me going. If I was not allowed to do politics for 2 weeks, and I wasn't allowed to keep up with everything,
go on vacation.
I love I love just going to the beach. I love to surf. I've only done it twice.
Nice.
Well, I've only done it a couple times, but I love it. And
awesome.
And I enjoy being by the ocean. I think it's grounding to have something that's so much bigger than you are. It helps you not get lost in every little thing that happens. It's like, it's okay. There's stuff bigger than me out there. There's stuff bigger than my problems. There's stuff bigger than Seattle and homelessness. Like, there's stuff out there that's bigger and that's constant. That is, that can keep you grounded. I know it's nobody really knows this, but my husband and I on a regular basis play Overwatch in the evenings.
Oh, you're a gamer. Oh my God, you're a gamer.
Nice.
I love it. See, that's an awesome answer. That I would never have guessed. I would never guess you play video games. I would never guess. I do.
We got into it. My husband is a rock star coder for Facebook. And so of all things. Yep. And so he and a couple of his really good code buddies decided that they would start playing Overwatch, and I got into it. Yeah. I main Orisa most of the time, but my favorite is actually Ashe. So if anyone's ever on Overwatch, they can come and find me, Lady K, on there.
There you go.
Lady
have to friend me.
I might seek you out.
It's a good stress reliever, to get out there and to relax. And like you said, the ocean, the coast. Us growing up, the three of me, Kacy, Adam, and I, on the East Coast, now near the ocean, a town that basically had an ocean, and you obviously in Washington for no shit. It's a state of mind that people in the middle of this country just don't understand. And there's people that never seen the ocean before, and it blows my mind. That, you take it for granted every day, but it's such a relaxing thing to just go and hear the ocean and the waves and the crash and the smells and the sound. I don't know. I think it's definitely a stress reliever, but
yeah, I agree. I think, seeing the big sky and the plains might be similar. Mm-hmm. But that, that huge body of water. There's
Yeah.
something about that just it brings you back to your center.
It's a beautiful country. We have plenty of, people who want to travel abroad. I always say, travel the country first, because from coast to coast in between, so much beauty in this country. No matter what state you're on, every state has a an area that's it's beautiful, and you can appreciate it, and seeing it for the first time blows your mind. So we have a question from one of our fans of the show, Alex, who watches and listens every week. He is curious about what your stance on legalizing marijuana federally. Obviously, you're in a state that pioneered the marijuana legalization, and a lot of states have followed, either decriminalizing it or making it for recreational use. Were you for this? Were you against this? How do you feel if we decide to take it to the next level and become more of a federal thing?
So I'm a person who really enjoys a nice Italian red in the evenings, and I have friends and family members that use marijuana in the same way. It's a way to relax in the evening, and so I understand the recreational use of it for some people is very similar to just sitting back and having a beer or something along those lines. And so again, as a federalist, I lean toward deregulating and decriminalizing marijuana use, even recreationally. I would say that I would leave it up to the states as much as possible. I think one of the reasons that the United States has made significant progress so quickly, even as a young country, relatively young country in the world, is in part because we're this cohort of states, of governmental agencies or entities that have autonomy, and so we can try different things and see what works. So if Washington State and Colorado decriminalize marijuana and legalize it, and they find that there are very few negative ramifications or consequences to that, then even if a place like, say, Texas says, no way, we're never doing that, it might be that experience and that what we learn from some states trying out different things actually helps us progress more quickly forward. Where even, if it's the other way around, if we discover, hey, you know what, when we do this, we really have junior high kids that are just a significant amount that are falling off the charts in their grades, or they're dropping out of school, or they're really struggling with addiction later on. You have kind of that ability to that flagship that kind of goes and tries something out and says, hey, this works, this doesn't, and then we can perfect it more quickly. We really can. And I think that's, as a country of United States, we really have this kind of unfair advantage, or this ability to progress way more quickly than anyone else in the world, because we can work kind of cooperatively or synergistically. It's like the progress that we make can then another state can jump right on to where we left off, or where we got to, and they can progress from there, and they can perfect it even and say, hey, you know what, this worked, but we're going to change it this way and see if it works a little bit better. And it's that whole concept of iron sharpening iron. As much as I would really like Washington State to go completely red this year, we really need a two-party system. The United States really needs a two-party system. We need to have both sides going back and forth, and hopefully reasonable on both sides, where it's not so
extreme. You get the extreme right,
and different. It will perfect us, because we have an idea, and then somebody from one side says, look, you're forgetting about this. Oh yeah, okay, we're going to perfect it and make it a little bit better. And it's those two sides that really make sure that we're on that straight and narrow path, so that we can progress to the benefit of the people that we govern, or that we our neighbors with. We can progress much more quickly, and it's a beautiful thing. Honestly, the United States is unique and amazing that we have that benefit, and sadly we take it for granted, or we don't realize it.
Like you said in your Wake Up Washington rally, you said it perfectly. You said it's not about right versus left anymore. It's not. It's really not.
And you need more.
you know.
And you need
we're far beyond that, and it's sad because it actually takes us back to liberty versus tyranny. Like this isn't about right and left. I love JFK Democrats. I love the JFK Democrat Party. The concept of, look, people should be free. We should guard over that freedom.
Mm-hmm.
And even if I don't agree with him on all of the ways that he wanted to make sure that liberty was protected, maybe his way of going about that didn't necessarily match perfectly with what I would have picked. But it's still, a beautiful part to making sure that we are on the best path and the fastest path for progressing. And we've lost that. We really have.
Kennedy was,
and I think a lot of it has to do with corruption. Sorry, go ahead.
Kennedy was very progressive for his time. I mean, he was running. He was a president. He was, a senator of Massachusetts at a time where his ideas to people who lived in the South were extremely foreign. Nowadays we take those for granted as it's the way of life now. But he was presenting ideas, and it was remarkable that he be elected and was able to be as successful as he was. Just basically, I mean, he was doing stuff that no politician had done before. I think nowadays we need more politicians like that. Like you said, there's no left, there's no right. We need people who can agree on stuff, and you have your ideas, but instead of just going so far to the left and so far, I mean, I feel like nowadays when you watch CNN and Fox, you might as well be watching news reports from two different countries. You see one thing is completely opposite than the other, and I like to watch both to get a perspective of, all right, what are they saying on there and what are they saying on here, and then I, as a reasonable American, would like to take both parts and figure it out myself, because no one else is going to do that for me. So I can take the good, and I think, surprisingly, I think a lot of Americans are like that, even though we see each side extreme on each, they show each extreme on each side. I think for the most part, conversations I have, at least with, Kacy and Adam here, and the conversations I've had with them in the past, we can somehow find a middle point where we can agree on something. And, we look at both sides and be like, hey, listen, if we just figured out where we can meet in the middle, everything would run smoothly, instead of just trying to, cut out everyone's knees on each opposing side. And I feel like between Pelosi and Trump right now, it's two people who are just basically, instead of worrying about the American public and worrying about the situation we're in and how we need to, we need the help to continue being a powerhouse in the world, they're just, concerned about taking each other's ankles out and seeing how much damage they can do to each side. And I don't think that's beneficial to me, to you, to anyone who pays taxes and works hard for a living and, basically just wants the government to help us, because basically that's what they're there for, to help us as Americans, because we pay our dues and we're due to have them help us when we need to. And we're in a state of, emergency right now that we need the help. And I think, for the president and the speaker to basically come together and be like, listen, we're acting like children. There are 70, 80-year-old children who are arguing over pettiness, and they proclaim they're for so many people and so many sides. But I don't know, Adam, what do you think? I mean,
no, I wish I had something to say. I disagree with you. Sometimes when I disagree with you, I'm extremely vocal. Today, I have nothing, because I 100% agree with everything you're pretty much saying. Kacy, what's going on?
You're quiet down there.
You're very comfy on your porch.
And Kacy, I know you're a very conservative.
It is a very comfy porch.
You're a very conservative guy. We've had conversations in the past, and I know what you think of stuff. What do you think? Any questions for Amber?
For Amber, no. I think we discussed anything that I would have had any interest in, because we're in Boston, and Washington is like different state, different time zone, different culture altogether. But as they say, nobody's quite like Boston, considering you've got just the Boston area is just like a hub of multiple different professions out there, multiple different.
But they're very similar. In the sense of, Seattle and Boston, I think are very progressive in the technology and, biofields. And, I feel like the structure of the states is similar, where the inner cities like Tacoma and Seattle to Boston, Cambridge regional area, very democratic in the sense. And the rest of the state is predominantly red. Would that be correct, that most of Washington, when you go to the east, it's pretty Republican, right?
It is, yeah. Once you cross the Cascade Mountains, I don't know, like, especially this year, I don't think you're going to have a single precinct that goes blue. I think it's all going to be red on that side pretty hard. Now, like in general, you know, you've heard Governor Inslee in the news a whole bunch because of the policies that he has and stuff.
I was going to bring him up. Right. You guys going to get a beer anytime soon? Hang out? You guys going to be friends and hang out? You should challenge him in an Overwatch match.
Oh, yes. That'd be a healthy way. That would be cathartic. That would be absolutely cathartic for me, I'm sure. So Governor Baker and even Mayor Walsh out with you guys, I don't hear a lot about them. I don't know if it's because everything out here is so chaotic and, you know, Mayor Durkin and Governor Inslee just kind of dominate our news cycle and stuff. But do you guys have, I don't know if Kacy can speak to this or you guys either, but do you have the same type of stuff going on with your specific leaders or officials, or are they as quiet as I'm perceiving them to be? That doesn't seem like I'm getting a whole lot from Massachusetts and from Boston.
I mean, Baker's definitely been very busy.
Yeah.
Okay.
He's certainly been extremely busy.
Baker's he's a Republican, but he really favors more of a Democratic side, and obviously that makes sense because Massachusetts, you know,
it's weird how we're a very democratic state, but we always have Republicans in office, like constantly. You never notice that?
We do, but I feel like they're middle Republicans. I don't think they're
more moderate. Yeah. Or at the very least, what I really particularly like about Baker is he actually listens to the other side and actually takes that information and attributes it to any of his decision making that he does.
Yeah. I feel like he's been more successful governor of the state of Massachusetts rather than Deval, who was here prior to him, who was more of a public face that didn't really do much. We talked a lot about him, but he didn't really get much accomplished at the end. And
I agree.
You know, at the end, that's why Baker ended up taking over. But you mentioned Marty Walsh. People of Boston, I'm
sorry. I know that feeling. So
they're not fans of him, and we all think, or at least most people who I work in Boston, and I talk to a lot of people who live in the city. They think he's way over his head in certain things, and Bostonians as a whole, we're very close knitted people. We come together on a lot of ideas. We're not as bad as a city as we seem to be cast as, this big racist city in the Northeast that everyone hates. I've never experienced a situation in my life where, it was, 1950s, Georgia type stuff, as a lot of these athletes and people want to paint the picture of. There's racists in every city, and there's stuff that happens, but for the most part, I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm just one person saying it, but I've never experienced or never seen firsthand some of the stuff. Boston's a close city, and after 2013, after we had the bombings here, you really seen a town of 750,000 people really come together, and not just the town, but all the the suburbs and the state and all of New England as a whole. Which the states of New England are so small that for the most part we kind of just group ourselves into Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine, Rhode Island, and half of Connecticut, because the other half belongs to New York. But but on Marty, Menino was here for years. Menino was here for about 20 years.
Mumbles Menino?
Yeah. And, say what you want to say about the guy, but he got stuff done. And, he wasn't afraid to, call someone out or, rip him a new asshole. Whereas Marty is kind of a pushover, and, if someone is really pressing on him to say something, it seems that he goes that way rather than taking more of a moderate and sitting back and saying, hey, listen, this is the side A, this side. He panics, I guess you could say. He goes into panic mode.
I feel that too.
Which I don't think is the best thing for a city.
No.
To get really, really local, the city of Somerville here, which is the, I believe, 7th or 9th most densely populated city in the country, the mayor there is still on phase, I believe, 1 at this point, where he's not letting anyone leave the house for this town because he's so paranoid that, the COVID's going to spread. This is a mayor who allegedly allowed a lot of stuff to go, through the byways to get some construction and this massive mall and complex built for all these commercial industries to be put in. And then now he's telling these commercial businesses that you can't open now because, I'm afraid of COVID. Whereas we're still relatively close to Boston and other cities nearby, that doesn't he think that his voters are just going to go to the next town over, just like we go to the next state over of New Hampshire to do something, then we're going to come
He's
on
lost
back?
his mind.
I believe so.
Arty, he has he's the one who also said that Somerville, Massachusetts decided to recognize polyamorous relationships in households, like people who have
Multiple
in a
husbands
relationship with more than one person.
Yes.
Like that's more of a focus than COVID is. You know what? We're going to recognize polyamorous relationships.
And I feel like that's a more
I think that a lot of times that can be the sign that they're not necessarily autonomous officials or mayors, but that they are actually under the same puppet master that's doing, because you see these same patterns where it's like, look, we have an issue that we need to deal with, and they're over completely, designating $1 billion for Orcas and stuff like that. And I'm like, look, Inslee, we have people who haven't had paychecks for 10,000 people who haven't had paychecks for the last 3 months, and you gave $1 billion to the Nigerians. What's going on here?
Yeah, Inslee,
right?
Get your shit together.
I think for first and foremost, if whether you're a ward councilor, you're a mayor of a town, you're a state rep, you're in the federal, in the Senate, president, your first priority should be your people, right? And at the end of the day, these are the people that voted for you, so these are the people you protect, these are the people you listen to. And obviously you're going to have people in your group that don't agree on stuff, but you as the elected politician, is your job and duty to listen to both sides and find a happy medium to get both people to compromise. And it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and it's just not happening sometimes. It's you're prioritizing other things where you have your own people starving. And United States, I gotta say, we don't have the poverty that some third world nations have, where their leaders really just concentrate on the 1% of the people there and say screw the rest of the people. Fortunately for us, we live in a society which that is not the case, but we do live in a society where we do have people that could use a little more help, and they're not getting it, and there's no enforcement of people who are abusing the help they're getting and taking advantage of the system, which I'm 100% against the people taking advantage of the system, because we all worked, we all paid our dues to society, we all have bills, we all have an obligation at the end of the day, at the end of the week. And to me, it feels insulted. I'm insulted when I hear needs a little bit of something, or you call your representative or your council or whatever to ask for something that was as simple as the parking sign had fallen down in front of your house and you need that fixed because people are illegally parking, and it's they shouldn't be doing that. And it's a task to get around, and I know that's such a minute thing and so small compared to the problems of the country, but it's where it starts. I think. I mean, it's all structured, all the same, right? I mean, that's all how democracy is built on.
And really, it's a sign of maybe the systemic, I guess, dysfunction of what's happening, where the things that need to be taken care of that really aren't such a big deal are being abandoned and ignored, and the things that need to be taken care of that are a big deal tend to be exploited then because they're huge, like healthcare. You can embezzle a ton of money when you're paying billions and billions for everybody's healthcare, and so it's a massive money maker. Education's the same way. Housing is the same way. If they own and control all of the housing and you pay taxes in order to have a house, and they give you your house for free, it ends up being so much money involved that it's very easy to swindle
money goes
the
away.
Taxpayers out of money.
That's right.
What's that?
You can hide money very easily. I mean, and you have your second brother-in-law once removed that runs the construction company that's building all the public house, and you can see money disappear easily. And like I said,
wait a second.
What was that?
Hold on. So I was just looking at some Jay Inslee stuff here, and
you're really on this,
Watch
huh?
out.
And I'm noticing
got a new enemy.
You kind of just touched upon it, Amber, about the Nigerians here. So This really happened. His administration sent hundreds of millions of dollars in unemployment benefits to an international fraud scheme orchestrated from Nigeria.
Jesus.
Yeah, that's really being on top of your
So
shit.
would he get the email saying that he has a uncle that died who's a Nigerian king, and you have to send him his routing number and his account number, and he'll be putting $1 million into your account? That's what it sounds like.
I don't know how this happened.
It sounds like he fell into a scheme.
Honestly, the story behind it is so insanely irresponsible. It's unbelievable. So we knew about it because my husband actually had somebody file for unemployment in his name, and he's like, I didn't file for this. People that are Facebook coders are still coding from home or wherever they can get good internet. And so we were confused about that, and turns out that Susie Levine, who Governor Inslee had put in charge of what's it called? Not the stimulus checks, but the unemployment, unemployment security or whatever. She's in charge of that. And one of the first things that she did with the whole COVID unemployment, because I believe a lot of this is federal money that's coming down to the state so that we can help pay for all of these people who are their paychecks and cover their paychecks. Well, the first thing that she did was actually remove all of the security checks and balances and the under this guise of we want these checks to get out as quickly as possible. So they literally had people who were filing unemployment through some email company that everyone knows is scams. And
That's
like nobody should ever be confused about this. I can't remember what the domain is, but I mean, it's blacklisted. It's terrible. And so they had this stuff coming through. They literally had, I think, 6 weeks between the filing of the unemployment and anybody even checking to see if that person was actually unemployed. It is a complete disaster, absolute disaster.
What a mess.
And it ended up being I think we actually hit $1 billion.
Wow.
It's bad. It's really, really bad.
Wow.
And Governor Inslee is not holding this person responsible at all. Susie Levine has not been reprimanded. He hasn't even chastised her or mentioned that it's been a problem at all.
It's
and
so
of course our attorney general
bury it.
Yeah. I mean,
well, yes. And honestly, from my perspective, I look at it and my red flags go up immediately for corruption, for this being an intentional, are we actually laundering money through Nigeria or was this an accident? That's where I'm like, look, I really, really want the FBI to do an investigation. I want them in there saying, look, we need to make sure that there wasn't something else going on here, because it doesn't smell right.
Yeah, if you were talking a couple 100,000, maybe. You're talking possibly billions here,
of dollars.
So that is definitely worth an investigation.
That's taxpayer money just going out to, that's the shit that pisses me off the most, is because
it's awful. And because of the emergency, the state of emergency, the checks and balance of it are basically non-existent.
Yeah.
It's hard to track down. And it's just, this easily could have been a money laundering scheme to just push it out into a foreign entity and bring it back somewhere else where we have no idea where it is and where it went. And it really should be investigated. And frankly, our attorney general is not doing anything either. That's that's probably the first line of defense, other than the governor saying, look, you're fired. This is ridiculous. The attorney general should be investigating and then, bringing charges at least of probably office misfeasance or malfeasance. Some kind of negligence at that point. So sorry I interrupted you, Arty.
No, that's fine. If I'm paying money, my tax money, I'm percentage. I want to know where that money's going to, and if it's going to a scam, then I am. This is what people got to understand. People got to listen and hear these stories, and got to do their homework, and they got to go when they go on November to vote. They have to understand that you shouldn't just vote for the guy you see on TV. Everyone's going to do their homework. It's your obligation as a citizen who votes, and it's the reason why you allow 18-year-olds and older to vote, and you don't allow a 12-year-old to go to the poll to vote, because they aren't educated enough to know. There's some out there. There's probably a few 12-year-olds out there who understand this stuff, but you're an adult. It's your responsibility to do your homework and not listen to one news channel or another, or read one website or another, or read one newspaper or another. It's for you to go out there to listen to both sides, to make an educated decision and to vote. And that's why we have elections because of this. And for all these people who live in cities or states that say, well, I'm a blue state like Massachusetts, so I'm not going to vote Republican because it's not going to matter. So I'm either not going to vote or I'm just going to vote Democrat. You're doing a disjustice for everyone who lives in your peers, because if you have enough people that sit there, I feel like only like 15% of this country sits there and does the homework before they vote. Like I said, I'm a Republican, but I voted Democrat before. I vote for the best possible candidate to help what needs to be done, whether it's my district, whether it's my city, whether it's my state, or my country, because at the end of the day, I don't like throwing money out the window, as I'm sure you guys don't. So when you get your paycheck at the end of the week and you see that hundreds of dollars have gone out, you want to make sure those $100 are dedicated to certain areas and are doing the right thing and not just patting some politician's pocket, because
absolutely. I think that one of the things that we need to recognize is that our country, our states, our cities would be radically transformed for the better if we just dedicated ourselves to being informed as voters and to being independent. That's it.
Listen to both sides.
I don't care about Republican or Democrat. Stop voting based on that. We just had a really, really excellent libertarian candidate for insurance commissioner who didn't make it through the primaries because a whole bunch of Republican voters went and just checked the R box, not even reading there were typos in the kids, in the candidates. He's very young, sorry. In the candidates voter pamphlet information that he put out. It was really, really obvious that Anthony Welty was the person that we wanted to have in that position. He's amazing. And Republicans did not do their job. This is, they didn't even read the pamphlet. They just said, oh, I'm voting all red. And
people see that. They see
maybe that's better than what we have. But for goodness sake, we really missed the boat on that. We need people to be informed. We need them to be independent.
Agreed.
And then we can turn things around.
So we're running close on time. Just one last question for you. How do you feel about mail-in voting? Because this is the big topic I see on both news channels. It's your ability to mail. I don't think the Postal Service can do it personally. I don't think they can handle it, and I think there's a lot of fraud. How do you feel about this? Is this? You tell me. What do you think, one way or another?
So there's a couple issues. I'll try to be really quick because I know we're short on time. But the Washington State has been doing mail-in balloting as a whole state since I think 2005. We moved here in 2004, and my husband and I registered as permanent absentee, which was kind of the precursor. And I think it was the next year after Governor Gregoire got into office that Washington State legislated that everybody would get mail-in ballots. And I'll tell you, it's convenient. I absolutely love that my ballot comes to my home, that I fill it out, and that I can mail it in. That's great. Washington State has been working on this for 15 years. And there are some very significant checks and balances that have to be in place in order for it to have integrity, election integrity. And what's being implemented in other states right now is not even remotely close to it. And Washington State, even with 15 years of experience with it and a really good, our Secretary of State is probably a moderate Republican, even though it's a nonpartisan office. And she does a very, very good job. She actually is very dedicated to it. She's well qualified for the job that she's taken on. And even with all of that, the legislature has still gone in and just completely decimated our checks and balances. They've removed her ability to do any kind of citizenship verification, so long as you check the "I'm a United States citizen" box and sign your name.
In the honor system.
She can't even go. We're a sanctuary state, and she can't even run an audit. There, up until 6 months ago or 4 months ago, there wasn't a database that had citizens in it. She had no ability to run an audit for non-citizens on our voter roll database. Here we are, and we give driver's licenses to non-citizens all the time. This is a normal practice for Washington State.
That's unbelievable.
And and you use that driver's license to register to vote. Just this last legislative session, they passed the ability to use tribal IDs to register to vote. There's no way for us to check those rolls to make sure that the people who are getting tribal IDs that it's legit. We don't even know how many are getting them every year. So it's they're sovereign nations in Washington State. The checks and balances are eroded even in a state where there's 15 years of experience. So any state that's trying to pass it really quickly because of COVID in order to make sure everybody can vote for the November election,
Mm-hmm.
is severely at risk for voter fraud. And I would say, as far as the United States Postal Service, I love my postal worker. His
Mm-hmm.
name is Arty, and he is actually from Nigeria. And Arty actually comes up. We talk all the time. He's excited that I'm running for office. Maybe I shouldn't say that,
Yeah.
but he is super, super nice. He makes sure that we get our mail, and he's dedicated to his job. But that's not always the case. There are instances where a candidate has done one of those bulk mailers where it's just supposed to go in everybody's mailbox, and they have video showing the postal worker dumping them in the garbage area before he drives off. They caught him doing it. And so it's like you're putting a lot of trust in an institution that isn't audited the same way, and you don't have the same government oversight that you would if it was in the auditor's office or if it was just the Secretary of State, along those lines. And so, as convenient as mail-in balloting is, I don't think it's worth it. And at this point in Washington State, a lot of us are ready to, get to the point where we do things the way that they do in maybe Iraq or Afghanistan, where they dip their fingers in and you have a little, black ink or blue ink on your finger saying, hey, I voted.
Yeah.
And use your fingerprint, where it just back to the bare bones to make sure that we don't have non-citizens voting in our elections and swaying things. Right now, I actually met somebody 2 days ago who is temporarily homeless because she's part of the Black Lives Matter protests, and she's living in my district as a homeless person, even though she's not from my district. During the elections, they can register to vote in my district during these elections, and all of a sudden, I'm assuming in 3 months, then everything will be finished with the protests.
Yeah, you would
and
hope so.
She'll move back in with her family or her parents or whatever. She was very young. And so, I think in 2016, they had the same thing in Olympia for the 6 months between, or I guess from between August and November, the primary to the general, they had a tenfold increase in homelessness. They went from like 30 tents counted to 300. And it's right in, a key district. And so it's just, there are too many options with same day registration that we have that's just been implemented with automatic registration, even for 16-year-olds in Washington State. That was just this legislative session. There's just too many opportunities for fraud, too many. So I'd say, no, it's not a good idea. As convenient as it is, it's not worth it, guys.
We're about 20 years away where we could stare into a computer and they could take our retina scan, and then we can vote that way. But even that will be hacked. As your husband will probably tell you, people are probably hacking Facebook every day, and we just don't even know it because that's the way. I guess you can't beat the good old-fashioned showing up to the polls and filling out a paper. I yelled at the lady when I voted last time around because she didn't ID me. And I had the ID out. I walked in. I gave her my address and I gave her my name, and she just gave me a ballot. And I go, aren't you going to ID me? And this is when I was running for election. And she goes, oh, and I go, you should ID people to make sure that's actually the name, because I know about 5 or 6 people on this list who do not live in the city but are still registered to vote here. And if I want to come back with a fake mustache and nose, I could probably say I'm that person, and you're not going to ID me, so why don't I just vote for myself again? But, like any system, there's always ways around it, but I think the solution to a good old-fashioned election is get out there, grab your ballot, get your pencil, and right there. But we are close on time. Amber, is there any last-minute notes you want to say, or how people can reach you, website, Instagram, Twitter, all that good stuff?
So I do a lot of my campaigning. Pretty much all of my campaigning is done on social media. It's easy and cheap, and when Facebook and Twitter aren't shadow banning me, it's quite effective. So anytime you can do a search for AK4WA, which is for Amber Krabach for Washington, and you'll find me on the social media pages. That's the best way to reach out to me. You can go to my website, which is ak4wa.org. And send me an email directly from there if you want. That's been actually really encouraging to get emails from people, because it's sort of an opportunity to just stop and read through something that's a little bit longer than 280 characters or whatever Twitter is now. And so, yeah, I appreciate being able to be here on the show, guys. This is wonderful.
It's great having you.
I've been to Boston once,
Yep.
And I remember my dad complained about people honking at him as soon as the light turned green. It was like, honk, and he was not pleased. But I'm telling you, Boston feels like a family. I don't know if it's because there's so many Italian people or what, but it's like you go and you're family. And I'm encouraged. It sounds like Boston's really holding on to that, especially after the bombing. And
we try.
And it's an encouragement to the country. Keep that up, and hopefully, Seattle will see it and say, hey, we can do a little bit better too. We can support each other, and it goes deeper than just political ideology and stuff like that. Hang in there.
Washington's a great state. Hope everything hope you guys can figure all the commotion that's going on out there. It's a great state to visit, and I always say, Seattle's a beautiful city, and just driving through Washington State alone it just blows your mind. I mean, it's the only state, I believe, that has a rainforest, right, in this country. Is that the truth? So there you go. You don't have to travel far to go see a rainforest. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. It was awesome talking to you and hearing your perspective on things.
You bet. Thank you.
Mr. Kacy, tell us quickly about your book and how you can get it and how we can make you profitable as an author.
Okay. Well, I'll definitely be sure to post my Facebook page in the comments section. But I do have a professional review out that actually can better articulate it than I can.
Okay.
So I'm going to go ahead and read that.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. In the sprawling fantasy novel, The Desecration of the World, a dark land is pushed toward a moral quagmire, blurring the lines between good and evil. In my fantasy novel, The Desecration of the World, a magical land shudders under the unrelenting attack of a demonic army. The continent of Alcathos has seen better days. Even its more prosperous cities feature more squalor than comfort. And Kanasa, one of Alcathos' oldest and most robust cities, falls to an army of darkness that's led by the mysterious Decrepit Tower. As Decrepit Tower's terror spreads, the continent struggles to amass a defense force, leading to some unlikely alliances. These would-be warriors race to discover a means of overpowering or at least stopping Decrepit Tower. Humans, elves, and dwarves struggle to maintain their morality and their sanity in the face of unrelenting death and destruction.
It sounds like it should be a video game.
Well, damn.
So read it. Get it on Amazon. It's available on Kindle as well, right? For a digital form.
Yeah. If you have, I think, KDB Select, you can actually get it for free.
There you go.
Can't be free. That's right.
Kacy, it's always a pleasure, my friend. Amber, Kacy, thank you guys so much for joining us tonight.
Thanks, I appreciate it. Can I ask Kacy a really quick question about his book? Okay. So I have 2 teenagers, 14 and 18. Do you have an age recommendation for it? Is it an adult book? Is it something that older teens can really get into? It sounds a little bit kind of Lord of the Rings, but maybe a little darker. And I can't. Yeah, I'd love to have your thoughts on that.
Yeah. To answer that question. So there are adult themes in there. It is not completely grimdark to the point where there's a lot of alluding to things that happen without actually showing it on the page. Because I was very mindful with certain things, which can be very triggering for that. In general, my series does read like a young adult novel, like a young adult series, and it is very Lord of the Rings-esque because I enjoyed it. I try to reread the series every other year. And yes, I am looking forward to the series that's coming out in 2021 through Amazon, that they're doing the Silmarillion. But as far as age recommendation go, it's fairly easy to read. I try to keep it simple. And even though it is dark and gritty, I try to, for the more adult concepts, I allude to them, but I try to keep them off the page.
Sounds perfect. Thanks, Kacy.
All right, well, check it out. And if you're listening to or watching the show out in Washington, make sure you vote for Amber. Thank you so much for having you coming on today, guys. We love having you guys on. And Adam, anything last minute you want to say before we go?
You can always check out my YouTube channel, my movie YouTube channel, The Whirlwind Potato, and subscribe. I should be returning from hiatus probably within a month with some new movie news and reviews and movie talk. So
Awesome.
Looking forward to that.
Great. And thank you guys again, everyone out there watching, listening. Hope you guys have a great night, and we'll see you guys next week. Have a good one. Bye.
Bye, everybody.